I'm Anna, Felix's ex-wife. Even though we're divorced, I still care about him. Maybe it's because we had some good years together. Or maybe it's because I can't shake the feeling that Felix is more vulnerable than he'd like to admit. After the divorce, Felix moved to the town of Enda, Alabama. It was a small, peaceful place where he could get away from it all. He didn't have many options. Besides his parents, his grandfather's old house was the only place he could go. It was about 10 minutes outside of town, in the middle of the woods and on 10 acres. Felix always said it was quiet, with old wood floors that creaked underfoot and a chill in the air, no matter the temperature outside. But he didn't mind. It was free, and after all, he needed a place to start over. Felix called me one evening after he moved in. His voice was relieved, as if he had finally found the peace he craved. He told me that every evening he sat on the porch, enjoying a beer in the quiet, with only the wind in the trees and the occasional owl hoot. I was happy for him, though deep down I was worried. But then, the whistling began. Felix told me that he first heard it on Saturday night, as he was getting ready for bed. The whistling came from the woods behind the house. The tune wasn't a song he knew. It was slow, off-key, and a little creepy. Felix told himself it was just a hunter or a drunken neighbor. But the whistling didn't go away. The next night it came back, at the same time with the same tune, but closer this time. Felix went outside to check, turned on the porch light, grabbed a flashlight. No one. No footprints. No sound. Nothing but the whistling sound fading into the woods. Anna, you know? That whistling always starts around 1:17 a.m. Almost to the minute, Felix said in one call. His voice was low, mixed with anxiety and exhaustion. I can't sleep. It's like some weird prank someone's playing. Felix decided to call the police. A deputy sheriff named H came to see him. As Felix recounted what had happened, Mr. H became pensive. After a moment of silence, he said something that shocked Felix. Your grandfather called us about this. Same whistling in the spring, at night. We never found anything. I thought he was imagining it, but now you're hearing it. As Felix recounted Deputy H's words, I felt a chill run down my spine. I'd never believed in the paranormal, but this coincidence was too strange to ignore. Felix ended the call with a worried voice. He told me to lock the door and stay inside. Felix had always been a strong, calm man. But since we moved back to his grandfather's house, I began to see a different Felix, anxious, uncertain, and there was something in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. The whistling started one night, when Felix was checking the windows as usual. At first, I thought it was the wind or a stray bird somewhere, but Felix didn't think so. He said it wasn't natural, it was intentional. I didn't pay much attention until Felix started putting chairs under the doorknobs, as if he was afraid something or someone would try to get in. One night, he told me, I heard it, behind the shed. It's closer this time. I watched Felix with his flashlight, the light flickering through the window blinds. He didn't come out, and I didn't dare encourage him. The whistling continued night after night. Each time closer, each time clearer. One night, I heard it from the front porch. 3 long whistles, then silence. Felix couldn't sleep. He rummaged through the attic, looking for something his grandfather had left behind. Finally, he found a box of old diaries. Reading them, I felt a chill down my spine. Felix's grandfather had heard similar whistling sounds too. He had lived with them for more than 10 years, especially after his grandmother died. He used to sit up all night with his rifle, waiting. Felix called Fo H, a friend of his who had also served in the army. I remember Fo H looking very serious after reading the diary. He just told us, "Don't open the door if you don't know who's there." That night, Felix sat on the couch, his pistol in his lap. I had never seen him like that, and I couldn't sleep either. At 1:17 a.m., the whistling began. But this time it wasn't coming from the front door or the porch. It was coming from inside the house, the hallway. Felix stood up, the gun shaking in his hand. I heard him shout, "Who's there?" There was no answer. The whistling stopped, but the silence was even more terrifying. Felix checked the hallway, but there was no one. The incident had changed Felix. He was quieter, more alert, and clearly exhausted. I could feel the fear creeping up on me, too. Part of me didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't deny that something was wrong. 2 nights passed, and everything was quiet. I hoped it was over, but on the 3rd night at 1:17 a.m., a new sound came. It wasn't a whistling this time, but a knock 3 beats, steady from the back door. Felix didn't move, didn't answer. We lay there, listening to the sound until it stopped. I didn't know what was happening, who or what was disturbing us, but I knew one thing from that night on: peace never returned. Felix was no longer himself, and neither was I. The whistling and knocking still haunted my mind, a warning that the worst was yet to come. Things had been strange since we moved into the house. 2 days before the event, the whole place had been frozen. No sound, no movement, no sign of life. Felix said it was probably just a coincidence, but I was uneasy. On the 3rd night, Felix went to bed earlier than usual. I remember the hallway light was still on. At 1:17 a.m., the first noise came. Not a whistle, not a night insect. It was a slow, rhythmic tapping, as if someone was trying to signal something. The tapping came from the back door. Felix lay still, but I knew he was listening. He was the type of person who wouldn't miss a sign, especially when the safety of his family was at stake. A minute later, a new sound came, softer like the trickling of water, but not from a faucet or a pipe. The noise came from the hallway. Felix jumped up and took the pistol from the nightstand. He told me to stay, but I didn't want to. I wanted to go with him, but Felix just shook his head. I heard Felix's footsteps echoing on the wooden floor, each step making my heart squeeze more. At the end of the hallway light was off. In the darkness, all I could hear was Felix's trembling voice. "Don't move." His voice was weaker than usual. I heard Felix shout again, "Stop." But that didn't stop the man. Felix fired. The shot shook the whole house. The echoing sound made me dizzy, but Felix didn't turn around right away. He ran outside, his figure disappearing into the thick darkness outside the door. When Felix returned, he looked haggard, his face sweaty and tense. He said he had fired a shot into the darkness, but he wasn't sure what had happened. Felix didn't want to stay in that house anymore. We left that night and he drove back to town, where we felt safer. The next morning, Deputy H went to check. He found the front door unlocked. Everything else was strange, but nothing was clear. I had no idea who or what had been in that house. But I knew one thing: we were never going back. I remember that time very clearly. It was like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare that never ended. Felix was usually a calm, rational person, but what happened at his grandfather's house changed everything. I feel the need to tell this story, because I myself cannot forget it. It all started when Felix discovered that someone had the key to his grandfather's house, something that was inexplicable. His grandfather had passed away many years ago, and the house had become quiet, a quiet memory in the dense forest. Felix went there regularly to check, and everything was intact. No signs of forced entry, nothing missing. But how did someone get the key? Felix didn't know, and neither did I. Fo H, a close family friend, advised Felix to change the locks immediately. Just a precaution, he said. But more than that, he suggested that Felix should leave the old house, because the surrounding area was full of strange things. Fo H didn't elaborate, but the look in his eyes sent a chill down my spine. Felix didn't object, and that very day, he drove to the local store to buy a new set of locks. I can't forget the feeling when Felix changed the locks. It was a simple act, but it felt like he was cutting off some kind of connection with the past. Soon after, he decided to leave the house. He said he was going to live with his parents for a while, and I fully supported him. We both agreed that staying there was no longer a good option. Before leaving, Felix and his father packed up the sentimental items from the house. Whatever was left, they sold or left behind. But what bothered me the most was the presence of someone around the house. Felix believed that it was probably a creepy person who lived nearby. But how did they get the key? Who gave it to them? And why did Felix's grandfather never mention it? We never got the answers. Felix sold the house and moved to a more urban area. But I knew he never felt truly at ease again. Even I felt uneasy. The experience was like a scar, a constant reminder of the inexplicable things in life. Someone had the key to Grandpa's house, and we never knew who they were. My story with my best friend in a small village. My name is Julian, and I still remember that summer day vividly. My friend, whom I will call Alex, and I had a strange, quirky, and slightly scary adventure. We were just kids, living in a tiny village of less than 100 people. Back then, we didn't even need our parents to look after us. The village was so peaceful that anyone could recognize any unfamiliar license plate within minutes. It was a scorching hot day, and Alex was crazy thirsty for Coca-Cola. Back then, soda was dirt cheap in the little shops, but we were a few cents short. While we were wandering around, an old lady called out to us from her porch. She said she was having a birthday party and wanted to make mint tea, but she was out of mint. She made us a deal. If we picked 2 plastic bags of mint leaves, she would buy us as much soda as we wanted. Sounds appealing, right? So Alex and I, without a doubt, dove right in. But man, the sun was scorching us that day. Sweat was pouring down our backs, and the mint leaves were frustratingly sparse. After an hour, we had only managed to stuff half of the first bag. I looked at Alex. He looked at me, both of us desperate. "There's no way we're going to finish this before sunset," Alex said. But we kept going. And then something strange happened. 2 men appeared from a distance. At first I didn't pay much attention, but as they got closer, I started to feel something was wrong. They were tall, at least 5, but to 2 8-year-olds like us, they seemed like giants. Both were dressed in black from head to toe, with hoodies covering their faces in the 100-degree heat. "Hey, you two," one of the men spoke, his voice strangely hoarse. I held Alex tightly. We had never seen people like that in this village. "Looking for something? Or just taking a walk?" The other continued, a smirk on his face. "We were picking mint leaves for the old lady in the village." Alex tried to sound calm, but his voice was shaking. The 2 men glanced at each other and laughed. "Mint? That's lovely. But you know, kids, mint is quite valuable, especially when used for other purposes." The words sent shivers down both of our spines. I didn't understand what they meant, but my instincts told me it was best to get out of there. We have to keep going, I stammered, pulling Alex along. But before we could take a step, one of the men blocked our way. Not so fast, kids. We just want to help. How are you going to pick enough mint before dark? Let us show you where. Alex looked at me, his eyes asking, "Trust them?" I shook my head, and we both tried to back away. But the guy quickly grabbed Alex's sleeve. "Don't be so rude," he shouted. And that's when I felt the real fear. I remember that afternoon very clearly. Everything started strangely. Two boys appeared before us, wearing tight pants that didn't look like people from my village. They looked no older than 18, but there was something about them that I couldn't quite place. Their facial features were strangely blurred, as if they had been erased. Their voices were childish, gentle and friendly. They chose their words extremely carefully, without any flaws. And strangely, they both called each other child. Julian stood next to me. He seemed to sense something was wrong. His expression was a little nervous, and he gestured with his hands, a sign language I had never been good at. I didn't understand what Julian meant, and I just smiled and nodded at the two boys. When they said they were looking for a field of mint, I didn't doubt it. "Mint?" I asked, and they nodded. Their faces lit up with excitement. One of the boys squatted down and patted me on the head, which stunned Julian. He rushed forward and pulled me back by the arm, his voice becoming tense and cold. "Who are your parents?" Julian asked, his eyes fixed on the two boys. I knew that question had special meaning where we lived. Here there were very few new generations born, and asking about parents was often considered a way to determine one's origins. But the two boys didn't answer. Instead, they looked at me, as if I was their main concern. One of them pointed to the distant hill and said, "The mint fields are there. If you want, we'll show you the way." I knew that hill well, where Julian and I and the other kids used to play hide and seek at night. But I had never seen any mint fields there. There were only corn, grapes, and a few scattered watermelons. But I was a naive, stupid kid, and didn't pay any attention to the red flags waving in Julian's mind. I pulled Julian's hand, urging him to follow. The two boys smiled happily and led the way, taking us further and further away from the village. And by the time I realized what was wrong, it was probably too late. I still remember that fateful day as if it had happened yesterday. He, my friend, who had always stood by me through everything, had held my hand tightly, his hand shaking and cold. I knew he was scared, and so was I, but I couldn't let fear consume us both. The village behind us seemed to disappear completely as we moved deeper into the forest's edge. In front of us, there were only dense trees, and not a single trace of mint like they had said. I began to feel something was wrong as I asked, "Where are we going?" But the only answer was a vague laugh. "You'll see. Be patient." Fear spread throughout my body, and each step became heavier. I wanted to turn back, but when I looked into his eyes, I knew we had no choice but to continue. And then I realized something was wrong. I leaned towards his ear, whispering, "There's something wrong with these two guys. Run." As soon as I finished speaking, we both rushed down the slope. I didn't know where I got the strength to run so fast, but my legs never stopped moving. All the while, I didn't let go of his hand for even a second. We heard their curses echoing behind us, and the heavy footsteps getting closer and closer. I was so scared that I couldn't cry. He was crying loudly. His breathing was ragged. But the strange thing was, somehow we both ran for more than Twakmung. without stopping or gasping for breath. When we reached the village gate, the old women saw us, their faces pale, their clothes soaked in sweat. They quickly pulled us into the house, gave us cups of warm chocolate. He couldn't say anything. His lips were frozen. I tried to tell them everything, although my voice was shaky and unclear. After listening, the woman sighed heavily and looked at us with worried eyes. Then she turned to scold him for being so stupid to follow those strangers. I knew she only wanted the best for both of us. From that day on, I never left the village alone again. Who those people were, why they took us away, I never knew. But what I do know is that if it weren't for Julian, my best friend, now my lover, I might never have made it out of that forest. Looking back now, I know I was lucky. We were lucky. But every time I think about it, I still feel a shiver run down my spine. When I was a child, our life was not easy. My parents always had to work hard, often outside to earn extra income. Therefore, they had to work at least 2 jobs each. This was not only because they wanted to maintain family life, but also to be able to support us, especially me and my younger brother, during our younger years. My parents were very busy, and in order to be able to focus on work while ensuring that we were not neglected, they decided to hire a babysitter. A girl named Tom, a young white woman in her early 20s, came to take care of us. She came every day, and every time she was around, I felt very happy. Tom was energetic, friendly, and she brought us fun playtime. Compared to old and tired babysitters, Tom was really a great alternative. When summer came, my parents decided that Tom should take a vacation after such a busy summer with us. They wanted her to have some time to relax, which I thought was well-deserved considering all the work she had done for us. But this also meant that there would be no one to take care of us during the summer. My parents didn't want to go through the hassle of finding a new babysitter, so they decided to take my brother and I to my grandparents' house in Texas. The drive was really tiring from the start. Both of us, my brother and I, just wanted to stay home with Tom, rather than go through such a long drive. I didn't understand why we had to go all the way to such a faraway place just because my grandparents wanted to see us. Finally, after a long and tiring drive, we arrived. My grandparents' house was just a small cabin in the middle of a large field, surrounded by trees and wild grass. There was also a barn-like building nearby, where they kept cattle and other animals like cows, goats, and chickens. None of that made me happy. We had nothing to do here, and none of the fun activities we had back home. Still, my grandfather tried to show us around the area, but I wasn't interested in what he had to offer. I just wanted to go home. And when it got dark, my brother and I had to share a small room with an old bunk bed. My parents were so tired from the long trip that they fell asleep quickly. I just wanted to stay awake and remember the fun times with Tom, instead of facing this depressing space. This summer was a really bad experience for me, and I didn't understand why my parents thought this trip would be good for us. It was hard to leave everything I loved just to go to a completely strange place that was not fun and just made me feel lonely. When my parents had to return home the next morning for work, my younger brother and I were allowed to stay up a little later. We sat in front of the old TV in our room, watching cartoons. The bedroom was dark, only the light from the screen flickering, making the room look strange. Around 2 a.m. I was still fast asleep, but my younger brother woke up. According to him, he heard heavy footsteps outside the window. I don't know how he dared to get up to listen to the sound, but he insisted that he heard someone trying to open the bedroom window. He even ran to his parents' room to report it, but they didn't believe him. They checked around the house and found nothing, thinking it was the sound of animals in the countryside. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. The smell of my grandmother's delicious breakfast made me feel more relaxed, as if all the worries of the night before were a myth. After breakfast, my parents left. My brother and I started the day by going out with Grandpa, feeding the animals and walking Cora. I remember fighting with my brother for the leash. When Grandpa handed the leash to me, I felt very excited. I always thought I was stronger, the senior, who would control this dog easily. But Cora was different. He pulled on the leash, as if he was resisting moving forward. When I bent down to look at him, I saw Cora's eyes fixed on the dense forest beside him. Instinctively, I turned my head to follow his gaze, and I froze. In the shade of the tall trees, I saw a dark figure. That person, or that thing, stood silently between the trees, looking straight at us. I couldn't see his face clearly because he was standing in the dark, but I could feel his eyes penetrating the distance between us. His hands were on the trunk, as if he were hiding behind it, deliberately watching us. I wanted to shout for him, but my voice was choked. Cora, despite my strength, pulled hard on the chain as if he wanted to rush at him. I ran as fast as I could to Grandpa and Cam, trying to tell them about the man in the woods. But when I turned around, the shadow was gone. He disappeared as silently, as quickly as if he had never existed. All day long I could not forget the gaze of the shadow in the woods. It was not just a lifeless figure, it was alive, conscious, and purposeful. But the biggest question still haunted me. Who was he? And why was he standing there staring at us? After all that had happened, I had really tried to convince myself that my brother was imagining things. When he told Grandpa about the figure in the woods that morning, I thought he would reassure him, like he always did. But this time when I looked into his eyes, I saw a flicker of worry, even though he tried to act calm and told us it was probably just a deer. We returned home after feeding the animals and tried to enjoy the rest of the day. My brother and I spent the rest of the day playing, watching movies, and running through the sprinkler in the yard. That night, Grandma cooked a delicious dinner with so much food that I felt extremely tired after eating. I quickly took a shower and went back to my room to watch TV with my brother. We fell asleep without realizing it, but around 1 a.m., I was awakened by a sound outside the window, a buzzing sound, a strange sound, like someone was humming. At first, I kept my eyes closed, thinking that maybe it was just the sound of the TV. But no, the humming was in sync with the theme song of Cyberchase, the show we were watching before bed. I opened my eyes and looked around. The room was still dark, the curtains drawn. My little brother was fast asleep. The sounds outside didn't stop, and a feeling of unease rose in my heart. I tried to calm myself down, thinking that maybe it was Grandpa standing outside smoking, singing along to the music for some reason. The idea was silly, but when you're just a kid, you always try to make sense of things in the simplest way. I decided to call out to him. "Grandpa!" I shouted. The humming stopped immediately. For the next few seconds, the room became eerily quiet. I began to wonder if I was disturbing him, or worse, if I was imagining all of this. But then I heard a voice. "Hey, it's Grandpa. Come out. I want to show you something interesting." The voice wasn't loud, but there was something off about it. I felt uncomfortable, as if the voice was trying to imitate my grandfather's voice, but couldn't quite do it. And yet I did the stupidest thing. I got up, put on my shoes, and opened the door. It was colder than I expected. There were no lights, but the starry sky made everything bright enough. I walked around to the outside, to the window where I heard the buzzing. My grandfather stood there. He didn't say anything, just held out his hand for me to take. I hesitated, but then I put my hand in his. His cold skin made me shiver, but I didn't pull away. He started leading me toward the barn. "Where are we going, Grandpa?" I asked. He didn't answer. I tried asking again, but he remained silent. A chill ran down my spine. At this point, everything began to feel wrong. Why was Grandpa out at 1 a.m.? Why was he wearing a hooded sweater when he always complained that it made him hot? I glanced down at his hand, and that was when I realized the most horrifying thing. His hand didn't feel human. It was longer, thinner, and the fingers were unnaturally cold. I felt strange bones pressing against my palm. It wasn't my grandpa's hand. I stopped, jerked my hand back, and shouted, "You're not Grandpa!" The thing turned to look at me, but in the darkness, I couldn't see its face. It just stood there, silent, as if waiting to see what I would do. I didn't wait any longer. I turned and ran straight home, shouting for my grandparents. The door opened as I approached, and there stood my grandfather. It was really him asking me. Panicked. What was going on? I turned to point out, "Hematian," in the darkness, but there was no one there. I'll never forget the night. Everything almost changed forever. It started out normal. We were at my grandparents' house for the summer, a place I'd always loved for its peace and the smell of apple pie my grandmother used to make. My little sister Cam was always whining and asking me to play with her, but I usually ignored her to do my own thing. That night was no different. I was lying on the couch, scrolling through social media on my phone, when I heard a scream from outside. I jumped up immediately. It was Cam. I ran outside, my heart pounding. Cam ran straight toward me, her face pale, tears streaming down her face. I hugged her, asking her what happened, but she could only stammer. I turned to look toward the woods and saw a figure blending into the darkness. Less than a few minutes later, my grandfather emerged from the house, his face tense. "What happened?" he asked, but I could only point to the woods. By then, my grandmother had called the police, and while we waited for them to arrive, Cam began to tell us. The story she told me sent a chill down my spine. A strange man had grabbed her arm. She tried to pull away but couldn't. Luckily, my grandfather called her from inside the house, distracting the man. She pulled her hand away and ran straight here. The police arrived and found the man not far away. In the ditch where he was hiding, they found an axe tucked into his pants. My heart sank as they told me what might have happened. The man was arrested, and upon investigation, it turned out that he was the ex-boyfriend of Tom, my grandparents' friend. He had been following us for days and had planned to kidnap Cam to threaten Tom. This made my blood boil. I wanted to rush over and beat him up, but my parents stopped me. After the incident, my parents decided to move us back to the city earlier than planned. They also found jobs closer to home so they could be with us more often. It's been 20 years, but the memory of that night still makes me shiver. Cam is my sister, and I can't imagine what my life would have been like if that night had ended differently. I always feel guilty for not being there for her more, but it also made me realize one thing: family is everything, and I will do anything to protect them.